Look at this footage from a disused casino in Northampton. Officers with chainsaws are breaking through reinforced steel doors and bricked-over entrances. Inside, they'll find thousands of cannabis plants spread across 3 floors, representing one of the largest drug operations in the county's history. But this isn't just another drug bust. This is a snapshot of a much larger crisis. A crisis where the people tasked with protecting us have become the very threats we need protection from. By the end of this video, you'll see how a police officer's gambling addiction led her to prey on the vulnerable, how organized crime networks exploit the desperate, and how the justice system responds when its own guardians break their sacred trust. On the morning of Thursday, October 30th, 2025, Northampton Town Centre was about to witness something extraordinary. At approximately 9 a.m., specialist police units assembled outside the former Asper's Casino on Commercial Street. This wasn't a routine operation. The building had been transformed into a fortress, with multiple entry points deliberately sealed, doors bricked over, and rooms reinforced with steel barriers. Someone had invested significant time and resources to keep law enforcement out. That level of preparation suggested this wasn't the work of amateur criminals. This was something much more organized, much more dangerous. The officers used chainsaws to force their way inside. What they discovered across all 3 floors was staggering. Thousands of cannabis plants in various stages of growth, a sophisticated operation that had clearly been running for months. Neighborhood Policing Inspector Nick Davis-Lyons stood among the green rows, taking in the scale of what his team had uncovered. He knew this represented millions of pounds in street value, but he also knew something the public rarely considers. Behind every operation of this magnitude, there are victims, people trafficked, exploited, and coerced into tending these illegal farms under constant threat of violence. As the officers moved through the building, securing each floor, a 36-year-old man emerged and surrendered. He was arrested on suspicion of cultivating cannabis and taken into custody. But Inspector Davis-Lyons understood that this man was likely just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. The real architects of this operation, the organized criminal group who financed it, staffed it, and profited from it, were still out there. The investigation was just beginning. The Northampton raid was not an isolated incident. Across the United Kingdom, organized crime networks have embedded themselves deep into communities, using sophisticated methods to import, manufacture, and distribute drugs on an industrial scale. Some of these operations span continents. On Tuesday, September 30th, 2025, police officers executed a warrant at a residence on Lord Street in Earlham. Target was Matthew Johns, a 38-year-old man who had been under investigation for months. Inside his home, officers discovered 14.4 kilograms of cocaine, a street value running into hundreds of thousands of pounds. But the cocaine wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the end result of a carefully orchestrated international smuggling operation. The investigation into Johns had begun months earlier, on Friday, May 2nd, 2025, when authorities intercepted 5 suspicious packages arriving in the UK from various addresses in America. Each package had a distinctive smell of cannabis, and all 5 were destined for different addresses in the same area of Bury. The labels listed fake American addresses as the origin points. Each parcel contained approximately 0.95 kilograms of cannabis. Fingerprint analysis on the packaging returned a positive match for Matthew Johns. Investigators then began piecing together Johns' movements. Flight records showed that on April 1st, 2025, he had departed from Manchester Airport to JFK Airport in New York. He didn't return to Manchester until May 8th, confirming he was physically in America during the exact time frame when the parcels were sent to the UK. The timeline was damning. Johns had traveled to America, arranged for multiple packages of cannabis to be sent to addresses he controlled in Bury, then returned home to await their arrival. The operation demonstrated planning, organization, and an understanding of postal systems on both sides of the Atlantic. Detective Sergeant Emily Whitehead from Operation Challenger at Bury understood what this case represented. This wasn't just about cannabis. It was about a broader pattern of importation offences that carry significantly more serious penalties than standard drug possession charges. When someone brings drugs into the country from abroad, they're not just breaking domestic law. They're engaging in international trafficking, a crime that law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions take extremely seriously. On Monday, November 3, 2025, Matthew Johns appeared in court and pleaded guilty to possession with intent to supply a controlled drug, specifically cocaine, and being concerned in the importation of a Class B drug, cannabis. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison. For Johns, the sophisticated operation he thought would make him wealthy had instead cost him nearly a decade of his freedom. But while some criminals plan elaborate international smuggling schemes, others operate on a much more immediate and visible level. And some of the most dangerous criminals are the ones we trust the most. On the evening of October 2nd, 2025, armed officers from the National Crime Agency moved through Clarence Square in Brighton. Their target was a 22-year-old Albanian man named Ervis Doksani. Throughout the day, surveillance teams had watched him conduct brief, suspicious meetings with multiple individuals. The pattern was unmistakable. He was dealing drugs in plain sight. When officers apprehended him, they conducted an immediate search. Inside a mint box and a cigarette carton, they found small quantities of cocaine divided into 12 separate deal bags. The packaging was deliberate, designed for quick street-level transactions, but Doksani's operation wasn't limited to what he carried on his person. Officers then searched the flat on Dyke Road, where Doksani had been staying. What they discovered confirmed their suspicions. Approximately 200 grams of cocaine, some of which had been placed in a frying pan, ready for further processing and distribution. They also seized roughly £1,000 in cash, the proceeds of his street-level dealing operation. On November 3, 2025, Ervis Doksani appeared at Lewis Crown Court and pleaded guilty to possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. He was remanded into custody to await his sentencing hearing, scheduled for November 27th. NCA Branch Commander Sarah Jane Moore was clear in her assessment. Drug dealing destroys lives and communities, and every dealer removed from the streets represents a small victory in a much larger war. But sometimes, the destruction caused by drugs extends far beyond street-level dealers and international smugglers. Sometimes it reaches into the highest levels of organized crime, where the amounts involved are measured not in kilograms, but in hundreds of kilograms, and where the violence used to protect those operations becomes truly terrifying. Edward Jarvis had already lived one lifetime in the criminal underworld. In 2005, he was sentenced to 28 years in prison for his role in a massive cocaine smuggling operation involving 600 kilograms of the drug, transported from Venezuela on a yacht. He served over a decade behind bars before being released on license in October 2018. Most people given a second chance at freedom would take it. Jarvis went straight back to the only life he knew. By early 2020, Jarvis had positioned himself as the right-hand man to Vincent Coggins, the leader of the notorious Huyton firm, an organised crime group operating at the pinnacle of the UK's drug trade. The Huyton firm wasn't a street gang. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise that imported and distributed multi-million-pound quantities of Class A drugs across Merseyside and the rest of the country. Law enforcement had been watching. In the early months of 2020, investigators working on Operation Concept managed to penetrate the gang's communications through the EncroChat network, an encrypted messaging system that criminals believed was impenetrable. Vincent Coggins used the anonymous handle Moonlit Boat. Edward Jarvis operated under the name SoftHerb. The messages recovered from EncroChat painted a detailed picture of the organization's operations. During just a small conspiracy period in early 2020, the Huyton firm was responsible for trafficking 150 kilograms of cocaine and 215 kilograms of heroin. Jarvis wasn't just a foot soldier. He orchestrated the supply of large consignments to mid-level dealers, struck deals with criminal networks lower in the supply chain, instructed couriers who distributed the drugs and collected cash, and coordinated with other organized crime groups to ensure smooth operations. The EncroChat messages also revealed the more human side of these criminals, moments that would later help investigators definitively link the encrypted handles to real identities. On Sunday, April 5th, Coggins sent Jarvis a happy birthday message. Jarvis's actual birthday matched that date perfectly. Jarvis sent his boss a photograph of himself enjoying the sunshine in his back garden. Coggins replied, "Haha, looks like you on a beach," before making reference to Jarvis's partner. In another exchange, the two men discussed cooking instructions for duck they had bought from Costco, debating whether it could be cooked from frozen. Records showed Coggins's Costco membership card was used that same day, and Jarvis's personal phone connected to a cell tower covering the store. These small, mundane details became the evidence that destroyed their operational security. The messages showed Jarvis discussing sales of tops, their code for cocaine, and bots, meaning heroin. The gang advertised their belter product to buyers in Scotland, South Wales, and across the country. They were running a business, and business was good, until it wasn't. In a catastrophic breach of security, the gang's stash house on Croxdale Road West in West Derby was raided. Over £1 million worth of cocaine was stolen. Vincent Coggins was, according to the messages, enraged, and when a man at the top of a violent criminal organization becomes enraged, people get hurt. Jarvis and his co-conspirators Paul Woodford and Michael Earl immediately set about identifying who was responsible. They settled on 3 men, Brian Maxwell Jr., Michael Eves, and Iobosa Igbanovia. Whether these men were actually responsible became irrelevant. The gang had decided they were guilty, and that was enough. What followed was a blackmail conspiracy that revealed the true depths of the Huyton firm's brutality. Although Brian Maxwell Jr. consistently denied involvement in the robbery, and others would later be convicted of that crime, the threats against him were so credible and so terrifying that his father believed his son would be killed. The father agreed to pay Vincent Coggins the full value of the stolen drugs, over £1 million, in exchange for lifting the death threat against his son. Edward Jarvis played an integral role in extracting this blood money. He facilitated the charging of a property in Widnes to secure £600,000 toward the debt, a charge that included punitive interest provisions. He acted as a go-between and negotiator, using threats to kill as leverage to extract a very large sum of money. Paul Woodford, meanwhile, actively sourced grenades and was described as an enthusiastic advocate for the use of extreme violence. Jarvis, Coggins, and 7 other members were arrested in early 2020. The case marked the first EncroChat investigation to be dealt with by the courts, setting a precedent for how encrypted criminal communications could be used as evidence. All of the gang members except Jarvis pleaded guilty. He chose to take his case to trial. In October 2024, Edward Jarvis stood before Mr. Justice Dove at Manchester Crown Court. The judge's words were unequivocal. The Huyton firm operated at the pinnacle of the drug trade, and Jarvis was instrumental to its success. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison for drug offences and the blackmail conspiracy. But Jarvis wasn't finished fighting. In June 2025, his lawyer, Michael Bromley Martin KC, appeared before the Court of Appeal, arguing that the sentence was manifestly excessive given Jarvis's role compared to his co-conspirators. He also argued that Jarvis should have received a discount for the 4 years and 3 months he spent in custody after being recalled on licence. 3 judges sitting in the High Court reviewed the case thoroughly. Their written judgment dismissed every ground of appeal. They found that while Paul Woodford had actively sought grenades and advocated for extreme violence, Jarvis was the one who extracted hundreds of thousands of pounds through extortion. The judges wrote that Jarvis bore responsibility for the entire conspiracy, including the plan to kill the suspects, even if he wasn't the one sourcing weapons. They also determined that offenders should not expect discounts for time spent on remand, and that Jarvis's previous conviction and the fact that he committed new offences while on license, were aggravating factors that justified the sentence. Edward Jarvis remains in prison, his appeal denied. Vincent Coggins's brother Francis, believed to have led the European arm of the operation, was arrested in the Netherlands earlier in 2025 and faces sentencing in November. But perhaps the most disturbing story is the one that reveals how corruption can exist at the very heart of the system designed to protect us. PC Marie Thompson was 29 years old and worked for South Yorkshire Police in Doncaster. In October 2022, she was assigned to investigate a man arrested on suspicion of possessing indecent images of children. She conducted the arrest, interviewed the suspect, and released him under investigation while the case was being built. It was standard procedure for this type of offence, but for Thompson, this case represented something else entirely, an opportunity. Thompson had a severe gambling disorder. She was in considerable debt, the kind of financial pressure that makes people desperate, and desperate people sometimes do unthinkable things. She knew this man was vulnerable, terrified, and alone. She knew he would do almost anything to prevent information about his arrest from becoming public. She decided to exploit that fear. Using a fake email address, Thompson sent the man a message demanding £3,500. The email was signed Paedophile Hunters and claimed that information about his arrest had been given to their organisation. It stated that the payment would ensure that information remains between you and us. The message positioned itself as coming from an organisation working to protect children, but demanded money from someone they claimed was a threat to children. The psychological manipulation was calculated and cruel. Later that same day, the man's partner received a text message saying a reply was needed by the end of the day. The pressure was mounting, but the man and his partner made a decision that would ultimately expose Thompson's crimes. They didn't pay. Instead, they reported the blackmail attempt to the police. Specifically, they reported it to PC Marie Thompson. Thompson told them she would investigate the matter. She opened a crime report and then immediately falsified it, endorsing the report to falsely claim that the man did not want to pursue a complaint. She made a number of lies in her pocket notebook entries, including deliberately changing the mobile phone number used to text the man's partner to conceal the fact that it was her own personal phone. Realizing her plan had failed and fearing exposure, Thompson sent a second email with the subject line, "I'm so sorry." The message read, "I came to drop something off for my mum and overheard you talking. I never told a soul and never intended to." It was a further attempt to cover her tracks, creating a fictional narrative of an accidental disclosure rather than deliberate extortion. Thompson continued working on the case until March 2023, when she left that team and her caseload was transferred to another officer. That officer visited the man to update him on the investigation. During the conversation, the man mentioned the blackmail attempt and said that PC Thompson had been unable to discover who was responsible. The new officer found this concerning. He decided to check the mobile phone number that had been used to text the man's partner. When he cross-referenced it with police records, he discovered it was the exact number Marie Thompson had provided on her police vetting form. The investigation into Thompson began immediately. When confronted with the evidence, Thompson had no defense. She pleaded guilty to blackmail and perverting the course of justice at Leeds Crown Court. On Thursday, November 7th, 2025, she was sentenced to 40 months in prison. The man she had tried to extort, who was later given a suspended prison sentence for the indecent image charges, provided a victim impact statement. His words captured the profound betrayal. "I feel extremely angry towards Marie Thompson. She was trusted in her role as a police officer in a department that comes into contact with probably the most vulnerable persons in society. For her to know the position I was in and use it against me is unbelievable." Following her guilty plea, South Yorkshire Police served Thompson with a Regulation 13 notice, issued to probationers deemed unfit to serve as a police officer. The notice was served at the direction of Chief Constable Lauren Poultney. Thompson subsequently resigned from the force on October 16, 2025. These 4 cases, spread across different cities, and involving different criminals, share a common thread. They reveal a justice system under constant siege from those who exploit it, circumvent it, and in the most disturbing case, wear its uniform while betraying its principles. Matthew Johns believed he could use international postal systems to import drugs with impunity. He was wrong, and now faces 8 years in prison. Ervis Doksani thought he could deal cocaine openly on the streets of Brighton. He was caught, convicted, and awaits sentencing. Edward Jarvis, despite already serving over a decade for drug trafficking, returned to organised crime and helped run a multi-million-pound operation that terrorised victims with death threats. He'll spend another 25 years behind bars, his appeal denied, but Marie Thompson's crime cuts the deepest. She was given a position of trust, a uniform, and the authority to investigate crimes against the most vulnerable. She used that position to prey on someone already at their lowest point, someone already facing justice for their own crimes. Her gambling addiction may explain her desperation, but it does not excuse her actions. The man she victimized was right. For an officer working with vulnerable people to exploit someone's darkest moment for financial gain is unbelievable. And yet, it happened. Inspector Davis Lyons, standing in that former casino surrounded by thousands of cannabis plants, understood something fundamental. These operations don't exist in a vacuum. Behind every large-scale drug farm are trafficked individuals, exploited and threatened into servitude. Behind every international smuggling operation are networks of corruption and violence. Behind every street-level dealer are addiction, desperation, and destroyed communities. The system continues its work. Officers raid cannabis farms, arrest smugglers, dismantle organised crime networks, and yes, investigate their own when corruption is discovered. But these cases serve as a reminder that the fight is never finished. For every Matthew Johns sentenced, another criminal is planning their own smuggling operation. For every Ervis Doksani arrested, another dealer takes their place on the streets. For every Edward Jarvis imprisoned, another lieutenant rises through the ranks of organised crime. And for every Marie Thompson exposed and prosecuted, the question lingers. How many others are still out there, hiding behind badges and uniforms, betraying the very people they swore to protect? The system isn't broken. These convictions prove it still functions, but these cases also prove that the system's guardians must be guarded themselves. Because when those sworn to protect become predators, the damage they inflict goes far beyond any single victim. They shatter the trust that holds society together.